If I were to pick two things that I'd be comfortable claiming to have any sort of expertise in, it would be history and video games. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean I have a lot of expertise in either of those things, just more compared to basically any other topic. And if nothing else, I just really enjoy talking about them. This makes a game like Civilization 6 kind of interesting for me. On a basic level, I just really enjoy it. I think it's a very fun game. But thinking about it from a historical point of view, about the civilizations and historical figures that this game allows you to play as, gives me a desire to analyze how exactly this game portrays these pieces of history through its gameplay. And that's what I'm going to do today, scrutinize a select few of this game's playable civilizations and leaders, focus not on how good I think they are or how well designed I think they are in general, but specifically how evocative they are of the real civilizations and people that they're portraying. I originally wanted to make a tier list of every single civilization and leader in the game, but I quickly realized that that would take like 8 hours, so for the sake of time and my sanity, I'm instead going to focus on 3 different civs and 7 separate leaders from the game. Technically 6 leaders, as 2 of them are 2 different versions of the same person, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Also, before we start, let me just say that this is all just for fun. I'm not claiming to be an authority here on anything, and this is all just my opinion. And also, my opinion is objectively correct, and if you disagree on anything I say here, then, we can't be friends. So, with all those introductions out of the way, let's begin. The American Civ ability is called Founding Fathers. All diplomatic policy slots in the current government are converted to wildcard slots. In addition, you also get +1 diplomatic favor per turn for each wildcard slot in the current government. We're starting strong here, as I think this ability is very good in what it's attempting to convey. From its name, you can obviously tell it's referring to the founders of America, so let's talk about that for a little bit. I don't want to lean too much into American exceptionalism and nationalistic mythology here, but it is historically accurate to say that the United States at its inception was an incredibly groundbreaking new nation in many ways, and this is much in part due to the many great figures involved in the Republic's founding. Men like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine were some of the foremost Enlightenment philosophers of the English-speaking world. And people like John Adams, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton were talented thinkers in their own right, and accomplished in fields such as business, politics, and law. You'd be lucky to have any one of these figures as one of the architects of your civilization, so the fact that America had all of them is truly impressive, and it shows if you study this era of American history. A particular accomplishment the civilization ability clearly alludes to is the United States Constitution. The diplomatic policy slots converting to wildcard slots make for a much more versatile and robust government, just as implementing the Constitution made for a much more versatile and robust government than had existed in the disunited colonies beforehand, and one which was extremely innovative when compared to the monarchies and aristocracies of the Old World. Lastly, the extra diplomatic favor you get from wildcard slots is simple, but it does allude to the United States having always presented itself as a nation that values diplomacy, and was one of the leading forces in the creation of the UN. Lincoln's leader bonus is Emancipation Proclamation. Industrial zones grant +2 amenities and +3 loyalty per turn, but plantations give -2 loyalty. In addition to this, you also receive a free melee unit whenever you construct an industrial zone or one of its buildings. I think this ability is broadly good in terms of representing Lincoln's administration during the American Civil War. The North-South conflict was very much one of urban industrial capitalism triumphing over the rural agrarian neo-feudal economy that ruled in the South, so having a military bonus that comes from building industrial centers does fit that rather nicely. One thing that's sort of interesting about Lincoln, both as a real historical figure and as a civ leader, was that he was not a particularly militaristic person, yet his legacy has been defined by violent conflict due to the Civil War that was thrust upon him. He was billed as a great negotiator in the DLC that saw his release, but almost all of his abilities have to do with war. I would have liked to see a little more representation of his domestic policies, particularly concerning him as a champion of industry. There is a little bit of that with the extra amenities you get, but I'd have liked to see some sort of ability relating to railroads. The first transcontinental railroad began construction during Lincoln's time in office, connecting the original eastern states to the vast expanse of territories America had gained throughout the 19th century. It would have been cool to have some sort of ability relating to this, and admittedly I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I just think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, especially considering there isn't any other civ or leader ability that relates to railroads at all. But despite that gripe over what they didn't include, what they did include with Lincoln shows a solid understanding of him as a historical figure, as well as the broader events that surrounded him. There are two versions of Teddy Roosevelt in Civ 6, Bull Moose and Rough Rider. I guess there's technically three since there was the original Teddy they made before they split him into two in one of the DLCs, but everything he has is also in one of the other current versions, so it'd be redundant to talk about him. Also, before I even get into it, it kind of irks me that they call him Teddy Roosevelt and not Theodore, because, fun fact, he actually hated the nickname Teddy and would probably punch you in the face if you called him that in his presence. See, look at that, even Sean Bean knows. Anyway, the way I see it, the two different versions of Theodore Roosevelt deal with two different aspects of his presidency, his domestic policy and his foreign policy. Bull Moose, so named for the progressive political party that Roosevelt founded during his failed bid for a third term in office, deals with the former, specifically his work regarding conservation and the National Park Service. Tiles with breathtaking appeal gain extra science and or culture depending on whether it's next to mountains or woods. You also get +1 appeal in any city with the national park. This ability is very fun and certainly unique, and I see what it's going for historically. Roosevelt was essentially the father of the modern National Park Service and was an avid lover of everything related to the natural world. But I don't know, I think this ability might be a little too abstract for my tastes in what it's conveying historically. Yes, Roosevelt loved nature, but is having your technological research bolstered by having pretty mountains to look at really what you get from that? I'm having trouble articulating exactly why I feel this way, but it just seems like a bigger leap than, for example, the Constitution being represented by extra government policy slots. The boost to your national parks is a little more easy to understand, but national parks don't show up until relatively late in the game, so for the majority of time you're playing, I just don't know that this really evokes Roosevelt in the same way that I think, say, Lincoln's ability accurately evokes him. Now, I must stress that I don't hate this ability, and I wouldn't change anything about it. It's great from a gameplay perspective. But in a hypothetical scenario where I was focused on quote-unquote historical accuracy and nothing else, I think I would focus more on Roosevelt's economic policies. Perhaps his biggest legacy as a domestic president was the way he reformed the economy, breaking the system of abusive monopolies that had dominated America in the aftermath of industrialization. I think having some sort of boost related to your economic policy slots could be interesting there, perhaps synergizing a bit with Founding Fathers. Moving on to Rough Rider, this is a different story, as I think his abilities absolutely nail what Roosevelt was like as a foreign policy president. His leader bonus, Roosevelt Corollary, gives +5 combat strength for all units inside America's home continent. You also gain extra envoys for city-states that you have a trade route to, and you get a unique unit called the Rough Rider. The Roosevelt Corollary refers to an addition Roosevelt made to the Monroe Doctrine, a long-standing mission in America's foreign policy to oppose any European intervention in the two American continents. The Roosevelt Corollary essentially affirmed that not only did Europeans not have the right to intervene in the Americas, the United States did have such a right, that the Western Hemisphere was America's rightful sphere of influence. Roosevelt was a leading figure in turn-of-the-century American imperialism. Before taking office, he was a staunch supporter of his predecessor McKinley's efforts to establish an American colonial empire. These came in the form of the annexation of Hawaii as well as the Spanish-American War, which saw the U.S. gaining control of Puerto Rico and the Philippines as well as strong influence over the newly independent Cuba. He famously volunteered to fight in the latter war himself, forming a cavalry unit called the Rough Riders, from which this version of the Civ leader gets his name and his iconic appearance. Roosevelt continued this agenda once he became president, crushing a native insurgency in the Philippines, building the Panama Canal, and generally seeking to project an image of his country as one of the big guys, a major player on the world stage every bit as equal to the great European powers of the Victorian era. In Rough Rider Teddy, we see both the violent and diplomatic aspects of American imperialism, bringing to mind his famous quote, "Speak softly, but carry a big stick." The extra combat strength on your home continent ensures that any other empire seeking to play around in your backyard won't have an easy time. And in getting city-state envoys through trade, you're essentially controlling these smaller countries economically, just as American business interests came to dominate in places like the Caribbean and Central America. Rough Rider honestly does, in my opinion, a perfect job of conveying what Theodore Roosevelt was like as a historical figure, and I honestly have no complaints. I think for a lot of people, when they think of great civilizations of the past, Rome is often the first or maybe even the only thing that comes to mind. So for a game like Civilization, I would say making the player feel like a Roman emperor to be a paramount design goal. The Roman civ ability, in my opinion, nails this. You get free trading posts in every city you found or conquer, as well as a little more gold from your trading posts. But the more important thing, at least when we're talking about being historically thematic, is that every one of your cities, if possible, starts with a road leading directly to your capital. This ability may be somewhat simple, but I think it's very historically on point. Rome's vast network of roads were in many ways the backbone of the empire, facilitating trade, travel, and military movement. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" may not be literally true, but it does speak to just what a monumental undertaking this continent-spanning interconnected network of highways was. And I think you feel that same sense of grandeur when playing Roman Civilization. Founding and conquering cities throughout the game, and seeing a web of intricately connected cities just like the real Roman Empire emerge, evokes the same feeling of awe and wonder that I get when I think of the real rise of the Roman Empire. Trajan's ability is, in my opinion, a little less inspired. It's called Trajan's Column, and it simply gives you a free monument whenever you found a city. While certainly mechanically useful, this just seems bland and boring to me from a historically thematic perspective. It honestly just feels like they said, hey, this guy's famous for building a really long stick, and we have a long stick building thing in our game, so this guy's ability will be about having a long stick. And as I'm editing this, I'm realizing that with this in the Teddy Roosevelt section, this is the second time in one video where I'm mentioning large sticks, so I think I should move on. Anyway, Caesar is who I really wanted to talk about here. His abilities are just so historically thematic, and I love them. You get 300 gold whenever you conquer either a city or a barbarian tribe. You also get +5 combat strength against and full experience earned from all barbarians. This of course harkens back to Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, during which he fought many different Celtic and Germanic tribes whom the Romans gave the unflattering label barbarian. And I think it's just so amazingly evocative of how the Roman army worked, both in general and specifically under Julius Caesar. Conquering territory and subjugating tribes, and using the spoils of those conquests to further fund your military ambitions. If you read the ancient sources on Julius Caesar's career, you'll run into accounts of times Caesar ran into money problems and his legions threatened mutiny because they weren't getting paid. One of the things Caesar would say to convince them to stay loyal was, just stay on for one more campaign, and after that we'll have all the wealth in the world and you'll go home rich. This is the exact dynamic you have when you're playing as Caesar. Your income could be in the negative, but it's okay because you know in a couple more turns you'll be able to raid that barbarian camp or conquer that next city, and then you'll have more gold than you know what to do with. Where Caesar's ability feels especially historically on point, however, is when you're playing with the Barbarian Clans game mode. This mode adds a number of new possible interactions with barbarians. Barbarian tribes are named and grouped together into various clans, and instead of simply destroying a camp when a military unit walks into it, you now have the option to leave it there and extract money from it, as well as hire units from them, bribe them to leave you alone, or hire them to attack another civ. Over time, depending on these interactions, a clan may even transform into a city-state. These abilities are perfect for Caesar. Now the optimal way to play is to control every barb camp you can see by parking a portion of your army next to it, never destroying it but instead extracting wealth from it every 10 turns, using that money to hire barbarian units and to upgrade the units you already have so you can control more clans and conquer rival civilizations. And this is exactly how Caesar's army operated during his conquest of Gaul. Controlling various key tribes and subduing those who resisted him, extracting wealth and resources from these subjects, and conscripting their own warriors. Just like how you can hire a warrior from the Stone Ape tribe and turn it into a legion. Much of Caesar's army, particularly his cavalry, was made up of Gauls and Germans who had been brought over to the Roman side. This is so cool, and I have to believe the developers of the Caesar DLC were thinking of the Barbarian Clans mode when they designed his abilities, because it's so historically thematic. I only have 2 real problems with Caesar's portrayal in Civ 6, and they're both pretty minor. One, his ability is called Veni Vidi Vici, which I know is his famous quote, but that quote was actually in reference to him crushing a rebellion in Asia Minor, not the Gallic Wars, which his abilities seem to be inspired by. Also, and I do think this is a little more major, but his voice actor speaks modern ecclesiastical Latin rather than the classical Latin that would have been spoken in Caesar's time. He says Veni Vidi Vici rather than Veni Vidi Vici, and calls himself
Caesar
rather than
Caesar.
You could call this a nitpick, and it is, but I just find it a little weird, especially considering they got it right with Trajan back when the game first came out.
Augusta Roma imperator Caesar Trajanus sum.
But anyway, despite those two very minor complaints, Caesar is my absolute favorite leader in Civ 6, especially in terms of how they portray him historically. They really did a phenomenal job here. Persia, to me, is one of the weaker entries in the game when it comes to accurately representing a civilization and its history. Their civ ability is satrapies, which gives you one extra trader as well as some small bonuses to the gold and culture outputs of your domestic trade routes. In addition, roads built in Persian territory are one level more advanced than usual. Apart from the bit about the roads being a reference to the famous royal road constructed by King Darius, the Persian abilities don't really seem too historically thematic to me. The satrapies were territories ruled by satraps, local governors that the ancient Persian shahs assigned to the various constituent parts of their domain. These people in many ways had the power of kings in their own right, hence the Persian emperor's title of King of Kings, and the level of autonomy they were given was a far cry from previous states in the region like the Babylonian or Assyrian empires, in which one ethnic group tyrannically dominating all others was often the norm. The Persian system made way for a more harmonious multicultural state that had ever existed before, and allowed for the largest empire the world had yet seen to live a stable and prosperous existence for over 200 years. And after that empire was gone, that system would endure as a model that many future civilizations would seek to follow. All of this is to say that I don't really think Persia's civ ability captures any of that. It all seems rather generic to me. I'd say giving some sort of bonus relating to governors would be the way to go, although in fairness they were introduced in the Rise and Fall expansion, which was released after Persia was added to the game. Still, I just think the ability we have is rather generic, and it misses a lot of opportunity to really capture the unique aspects of Persia as a civilization with its long and storied history. Where my beef really lies, though, with Persia's portrayal is with Cyrus. I really do not like how this game portrays Cyrus. His ability is called Fall of Babylon. Your units are buffed for 10 turns after declaring a surprise war, and you don't suffer the penalties that usually come with surprise wars. You also get extra loyalty in cities that have a garrison unit. Now, the extra loyalty I actually do like. It speaks to Cyrus's skill in winning the favor of conquered peoples, although you could perhaps argue that this would be better suited in the satrapy's ability. But regardless, it's fine. Surprise wars, though? Cyrus certainly went to war many times throughout his reign. You don't get to rule nearly the entire known world without doing that. But by the standards of the time, Cyrus was known as one of the most benevolent and altruistic leaders that had ever existed. When he conquered the kingdom of Lydia, he spared its king's life, allowing him to serve honorably in his court as a royal advisor. When he conquered Babylon, he liberated the Jews from their 70-year-long captivity in that city. The 2 centuries of Persian rule that followed is considered to be a golden age in Jewish history, and in the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is the only Gentile to ever be conferred the title of Messiah. With all of this in mind, the scheming villainous figure we see, with abilities themed around betraying those around you, seems like an inaccurate characterization to me. I understand a lot of this is a matter of perspective. A lot of Cyrus's enemies probably wouldn't agree with the adoring characterization I just gave him. But I mean, come on, they make this guy look like Jafar or something. I think part of this comes from a larger bias against the Persians, which goes as far back to the ancient Greeks who had good reason to hate them and also wrote the vast majority of Western sources on the ancient world. Depictions of the ancient Iranian Shahs as cruel, oppressive, and decadent rulers was also bolstered in the modern imagination by that piece of Zack Snyder schlock 300. Speaking of Shahs, I don't really have too much to say about Nadir. He gets extra combat strength against full health units and some more trade route bonuses. I honestly think this could be applied to pretty much any militaristic sort of leader, but admittedly I know far less about Nadir Shah than I do any of the other figures I've talked about in this video, so perhaps I'm missing something. Though I will say it does seem like a missed opportunity to not give him a Jazayurchi unique unit. Alright, and with that, I suppose that's all there is for today. I don't really have any grand conclusions here, other than, Civilization 6 is a neat game, and it represents some civilizations and leaders very well, and it represents some others not as well, but that's okay. I still love it anyway, and I also love you. Okay, bye.